So my best friend just told me that I need to spice things up a little bit on this channel by getting a Ouija board and using it right here live for you all to see. I told this man he must be out his mind. Look, ain't no way. Shit. Ain't no way. But Dougie made a video talking about the history of the Ouija board. We're about to check it out because that's about all I can do. Let's watch.
Everybody's familiar with Ouija boards. I always thought they were a silly party trick or a way to spook your younger sibling. But once you start diving into the story about the Ouija board, it gets absolutely bizarre. There's a mainstream narrative about them, but once you dive a little bit deeper, there's a couple very fascinating theories. So in today's video, I'm going to dive into two of the theories about the real origin of the Ouija board and one specific deadly Ouija board that's been in rotation for decades. This Ouija board has ruined countless lives and has started a massive internet conspiracy theory. Then I'm going to tell you three stories of three victims that I went out and found myself. And each story gets progressively creepier, so make sure you stay till the last one. But I'll be quick. If you're ready to suspend your disbelief and become fully immersed in today's adventure, you found your new favorite channel. We post once a week, but there's plenty on the channel to binge. So if you're ready, like the video for good luck, because you're gonna need it. Also, make sure to subscribe so you never miss an upload. Enjoy the show. When you go as far down the rabbit hole as I did, you start to connect dots. And it seems to me that there's one item that's completely left out of all of the mainstream narratives. There are countless eyewitness testimonies that all report interacting with this diic box. That seems to be the most common way people describe it, a diic box. If you don't know what a diic is, it's a malevolent wandering spirit that attaches to things. Usually it just attaches to people, but sometimes it can attach to inanimate objects, especially when somebody who practices Satanism or witchcraft actively manipulates the spirit and traps it in this item, or in this case, a box. So there's rumors about this diic box that resembles a Ouija board. And these go as far back to pre-Civil War. The basic description of this diic box is that it's round, wooden, with metal engravings, like somebody carved out pieces of wood and then dripped hot metal inside of the wood until it hardened to make the engravings really pop. And I really want to punch home how unique this item is. This isn't your typical diic box. This one is very intricate and it's much smaller than usual ones. Most diic boxes are antique wine cabinets, but this one is so different than that. This specific diic box is about this big, and if you're just listening to it, it's about the size of a 16-inch pizza, and it has a very unique cover and lock. The entire thing is a circle, and the front face of it is very similar to a rotating perpetual calendar. And to access the inside of this box, users have to move the perpetual calendar and put their own birthday in it. And then apparently it pops open for them. And the lock code changes depending on who's opening it. You have to put your personal birthday into it for you to open it. And then apparently the numbers snap to a random date in the future and the whole thing pops open for you, revealing what you would commonly describe as a Ouija board. So now that you know about this item and this very unique Ouija board diic box thing, now I could tell you about the two theories based on this box. So theory one is that the two founders of the Ouija board came across this relic. They came across this box and they managed to open it, and it was answering questions for them. And after months and months of interacting with it, it started giving them full sentences and very detailed directions on what it wanted them to do. And this box encouraged them to create the Ouija board and sell it on a mass scale, because the interior of this diic box has all of the key elements that a Ouija board has. It has the alphabet, it has numbers 1 through 10, it has yes and no, it has goodbye on the bottom, and it has that heart-shaped planchette that goes over the letters to tell you what the spirits are saying. But then there's theory two, and theory two is that the founders were just capitalists trying to make a profit on mourning people after the Civil War, and a real Satanist found it very disrespectful because he felt like it was mocking his craft. So he created a real diic box that the interior resembled the Ouija board, and he put it into circulation to punish people that mock his craft, and it's still in circulation, going from person to person, ruining lives. So now that you understand the origin of the box and the two theories around the box, now I'm going to go into these three stories, and you're going to tell me which theory that you think is true based on these stories that I'm about to tell you. So we actively tracked down three people that have interacted with this diic box / Ouija board. We personally tracked these people down and gathered their stories. Each one of these people came across the box in a very unique way. They either came across it randomly or somebody presented it to them and forced them to interact with it. And each one of these people asked it a question, and the answer to the question altered their lives forever.
Woo! This is gonna be good.
We found a Reddit post that was connected to this case, and we managed to get a hold of the Reddit user that posted it via DM. Her name was Natalie, and initially she was very reluctant to speak with us because most of the people that reach out to her via Reddit are just trying to get more information on the diic box to track it down for themselves to use it. They aren't actually interested in her story at all. They're looking for details and clues to get themselves closer to this famous diic box. Obviously, understanding her concerns, we tried to be as delicate as possible while still being a little bit pushy because we really wanted to hear her side of the story. And eventually, after a thorough convincing, she agreed to come meet with us. So we met up with Natalie over coffee, and she was incredibly friendly. This girl was such a nice girl, but we could also tell that she was being extra friendly, trying to cope with the anxiety that this specific topic brings up for her. And it seemed like she would have been perfectly happy having small talk the entire time we were there and just completely avoiding the elephant in the room. But eventually we had to turn the conversation to the topic at hand as politely as we possibly could, but this is what we were here for, and this is what we wanted to know. We made her as comfortable as we possibly could by ensuring her that we weren't going to judge her based on anything that she said. No matter how far out the story was, we were just here to listen. So this is my rendition of the story that she told us. She took a deep breath and then she went, "The whole thing was my fault. I wanted to play with it. None of it would have happened if I hadn't encouraged him to try it. Encouraged Thomas to try it. We were just hanging out one night and we found it in one of those plastic tube tunnels at the playground. You know how playgrounds just have those random plastic tunnels that kids just will crawl through in one side then out the other? We found it in one of those. We were in our teens, so we started to become a little bit more mischievous and we were exploring different substances, and we used to go inside of that plastic tunnel to smoke in. And on a random Saturday night, we crawled in there to do what we usually did, and it was just in there. It was just sitting in the middle. We crawled in on opposite sides, so we found it at the same time, and we were both as weirded out by what we were looking at. I don't know what kind of sick freak would put it into a children's playground, but that's where we found it. Before you ask, we have no idea who put it there. We didn't see anybody go in or out, and it was just there when we showed up. But since we found this thing and we were silly teenagers, we decided to do something different that night. Usually we would just smoke in that plastic tunnel and walk around the park and just have a couple laughs before heading home. We decided to smoke, take this thing, and bring it back to my place to mess with it. And everybody that I told this story to, my parents, his parents, all of our friends, they all told me that what we smoked that night was laced. And they're all completely convinced that that's why Thomas started acting the way he was acting. But they weren't there. Thomas was a complete lightweight and took one random puff in the middle of this J. I don't even think he inhaled. I smoked most of that J myself, and I don't even think he inhaled his puff. So I know what we smoked couldn't have been laced. It had nothing to do with why he was acting the way he was acting. I know that the box was the source of his issues. We didn't even know what was inside of it. The outside was just intriguing, so we wanted to get into it. The outside was some type of circular calendar that was adjustable. It looked like a mix between a calendar and a spinning padlock. I took the lead on trying to open it, and I was just trying a bunch of important dates in history that I could come up with, but none of them opened it. I must have been trying for 45 minutes until my high started to wear off, and I finally just put it down on the table in front of Thomas. Thomas was reluctant to play with it. He wasn't standing over me, watching me, trying to figure out how to get inside of it. He didn't really want anything to do with it, but I put it right in front of him. I encouraged him to just give it a try, but jokingly, he just put in his birthday, thinking that no way this would open it. And right when he put it in, it started making a bunch of very odd clicking sounds. The sound it was making told me that there was a bunch of intricate locks unlocking inside of the box. And right before the box popped open, the calendar on the front of the box sprung to a random date. We didn't think anything of it at the time. We just assumed that the lock was resetting. But right after it sprung to the different date, it popped open. It was sitting in front of Thomas, so he just opened it all the way. And the inside resembled some type of freaky Ouija board. It had that little heart-shaped piece that you move around in everything. And everybody knows what a Ouija board is, so we both recognized it immediately. And Thomas didn't like it. And I remember Thomas laughing and pushing it away as if he had no intention of playing with it. He laughed pretending that he thought it was stupid, but I could tell that it freaked him out a little bit, so I egged him on because I thought it would be fun. And I kept pressuring him. I just said, ask it one thing. He didn't even touch this box after he opened it. He didn't do that opening seance thing that you usually do with a Ouija board. He just asked it one question. He didn't even touch that little piece that moves. He didn't interact with it how you're supposed to interact with a Ouija board. He just playfully asked it, will I be happy, in a very playful manner, because I could tell he wasn't actually trying to interact with it. And I could tell that he chose a lighthearted question because he wanted to entertain me, but not ask it anything too risky. Plus, he wasn't even touching it. And I don't know if he saw it move before I did, but it was like his eyes locked onto the board, and he was just frozen there staring at it, and he wouldn't look at me. But after a couple moments, the little piece that was on the inside moved. It scrolled over the letter Z first, and then after like 2 seconds, it shifted to O. And from where I was standing, my perspective was that the Z looked like an N. And then when it scrolled to an O always looks like an O, so I thought it was saying no, which was terrifying in its own right that this thing was moving by itself. But I heard Thomas whisper to himself, Zo, because from where he was sitting in his perspective, it read Z-O. Then he started repeating it to him over and over to himself before I closed the board. He was just saying Zo, Zo, Zo. We were both really shaken up. It freaked me out, but he was way worse off than I was. He seemed traumatized from it from the first night, not very talkative after it happened. And it got to the point where I had to call his parents to come pick him up because he wouldn't even talk to me. He would barely look at me, and he was just staring off into the distance. I had no other choice but to call his parents to pick him up. And after he left, I was inspecting the box, trying to see if it was some type of gimmick, if there was a way for some magnet on the bottom to drag that piece around, but I couldn't find anything weird about it other than just how weird it was in general. I considered breaking it to try to see what was on the interior, if there was any tricks inside of the wood, but for some reason in my teenage mind, it seemed like bringing it to a pawn shop and selling it for $40 was a better idea. Because I'm going to be honest with you guys, I was just a teenager looking to get high again, and I figured selling it to a pawn shop and getting $40 for it was better than leaving it in a random playground like the last guy. But after that night, Thomas was never the same, and I didn't even see him for a couple weeks. We used to hang out at least every other day. He wouldn't reply to my calls, he wouldn't show up to school, and eventually his parents came to my house to ask us what we smoked that night. And I told them the truth. It was just your typical weed, and I was honest with them. We smoke it pretty much all the time, and we get it from the same guy every time, and there's never been an issue. But they did not believe me. They were fully convinced it was laced. And they were just yelling at my parents and myself, saying that we fried their kid's brain. And when I told them about the box and what happened, they got even more upset and told me that I didn't have to make up some random lie just to get out of trouble. And I tried to tell them that Thomas didn't even smoke that night. He might have taken a quarter puff. There's no way that what he smoked did that to him. But they didn't believe me. So they told me I wasn't allowed to hang out with their son anymore. But they didn't say anything about going to look for him to check on him. So I was going to all of his favorite places, and he was nowhere to be found. But eventually, a couple weeks later, I stumbled across him on a random street. I saw him from down the block, so I ran up to him to check on him. And at this point, just a few weeks later, Thomas looked nothing like the friend that I grew up with. He was almost completely unrecognizable. He was drawn out, unshaven, bags under his eyes, and underslept. And I was calling his name from down the street, but he wasn't responding to me. He wasn't even looking at me. So I continued to chase him down to confront him and talk to him to try to snap him out of whatever was going on with him. And when I got in front of him and I was trying to get his attention and I was trying to speak with him, he finally looked up at me, and he looked at me as if he didn't even know me. The only thing that I could get out was, Thomas, are you okay? And he looked up at me through the top of his eyes, and he gave me a little malicious grin and said, my name is Zo. Where did you put the box? He said his name was Zo, the same way he was whispering Zo the day that happened. And I was trying to talk to him about other things, trying to snap him out of it, but he was just hyper fixated on this box. And he started to egg me on, similar to the way that I was egging him on the night that it happened. And he told me that I need to give it a try this time. And to be completely honest with you, Thomas was acting like a drug addict. And at this point, I could clearly see why his parents didn't believe me. He was jittery and completely in his own world, hyper fixated on his own narrative. Everything about him felt like an addict. This was world shattering for me. I was devastated. I blamed myself, and to this day, part of me still does. But in that moment, I wasn't able to comprehend the feelings that I was feeling, so I just lashed out at him, and I desperately just tried to get through to him. I was crying and pleading and begging for Thomas to talk to me, but the more I asked for Thomas, it seemed the more satisfied and happy that he got. And every time I would say Thomas, in the middle of my sentence trying to plead with him, he would condescendingly talk over the name Thomas and under his breath say Zo. And that first interaction ended with me running off in hysteria, realizing that my friend was completely gone and I had something to do with it. But he didn't just let me run away. He was chasing after me, laughing, calling to me, where did I put at the box, let's go find it, let's go play with it, as if this was a whole game, like it was a scavenger hunt for this box. I personally couldn't get myself to go see him after that interaction, but from what I heard, he never got any better. Apparently they would find him wandering around the streets asking random people for information about this box. He would loiter in pawn shops asking the owners relentlessly if they'd seen anything like it come through, until finally, over a year later, his parents finally made the decision to try to put him into a mental institution. They couldn't send him to a rehab because they tested him a few times and he never had any drugs in his system, and they never saw him take any drugs either. He was just acting bizarre, so their only option was to send him to a mental institution. But even though they couldn't find any drugs in his system, he was still acting like an addict, your typical addict, sabotaging his life in every way. He wouldn't show up to school, he wouldn't take any jobs, he wouldn't take care of himself. His parents desperately tried to get through to him, they tried to speak with him, they even started entertaining that his name was Zoe just to get him to talk to them. And apparently he never let go of this sarcastic, condescending attitude. Like everybody that was suffering around him, watching him destroy his life, was in some way amusing and laughable. The only thing that mattered to him was the box. One detail that really stood out to me that his mom told me was that one night when she was pleading with him to let her help him, and he was just laughing in her face, while she was crying, he randomly got really serious. He stopped laughing, he looked at her right in the eye with devastation on his face and said, "Mom?" as if he snapped out of it for a split second, was about to cry. And his mom, overwhelmed with the fact that she might have just got through to him, grabbed him by the face and was like, "Thomas, is that you?" They embraced for a moment, and when she pulled back to look in her son's eyes, who she thought that she just got through to, he was smiling menacingly, and their faces were an inch away from each other. And with this smile on his face, he said, "No, it's Zoe," before maniacally laughing and closing himself in a broom closet nearby. He faked snapping out of it to draw his mom into a vulnerable situation, just for him to say, "No, it's Zoe," and laugh in her face, and that finally broke her. That was his mom's absolute last straw, so she called in the professionals after that. And just a few days later, they took him to the mental institution. He tried his best to evade capture, but eventually they found him. And this might be the worst part of the story. They found him in the plastic tunnel that we found the box. And on top of that, the institution that they took him to was called Happy Trails. And their slogan is, "Everyone is happy here." So after Natalie finished telling her story, I could tell that she was emotionally drained. I thanked her for sharing it with us, and I was ready to turn the conversation to something a little bit more lighthearted. But she had one more thing to say, and she said, apparently he's getting better now, and apparently he's recognizing that his name is Thomas, and he's completely denying acting the way that he was acting. He was saying that the person that was doing that wasn't him. He's saying that it was Zoe. Naturally, I asked her if she thought he was lying to get out of the institution to then further pursue the box, and her answer actually surprised me. She said, "I think he's telling the truth. I think somebody else opened the box, and Zoe is with them now."
Whoa. That's crazy.
So this story was actually a submission to the channel months ago. The person initially reached out with a wall of text via Instagram DM. And to be honest, the message was so long and disorganized that it seemed like nonsensical rambling. But I did give the message a quick skim, like I do every other message, and I saw the word Ouija in it. And at the time, I wasn't interested in this subject whatsoever. But once I found out about this diic box that's in rotation, I thought about that wild DM that I got. So I immediately went to my Instagram and I started scrolling way down searching for it. I wasn't able to follow it in the message, so I copied and pasted it into a Word document and spaced it out properly so I could actually read this thing and comprehend what I was reading. And before I was even halfway through with this person's story, I knew I had to reach back out to the person that sent it, because it had too many overlapping similarities to the story about Thomas that I had to dig deeper into it. The sender of the message got back to me very quickly, and we immediately talked for over an hour. We just hopped on FaceTime and I just learned this guy's life story. They asked to stay anonymous, so I'm going to respect him and I'm going to do that, but he said I could do my rendition of his story. So this is how it goes. I asked him to start from the beginning, and he goes, "Well, it all started at day camp, and I hadn't thought about that day again until the recent news. What we were doing back then was all just childhood fun and games, but since that accident happened, I can't stop thinking about it. Everyone took a turn on the board, and if what he asked it came true, I'm scared for what's going to happen to me and all of those other guys that were there that day." I stopped him right there because he was already jumping around a little too much, and I just repeated myself and asked him to start from the beginning. And I watched him gather himself, and then he restarted by saying, So I went to this sleepaway camp every summer in Wisconsin. I looked forward to that every single year. That place was absolutely amazing. It made my childhood memorable. It had sports, camping, ziplining, hiking, horseback riding, tubing, capture the flag during the day, campfires at night. That place is still my favorite place to this day. So much so that I even volunteered there into my mid-20s, trying to create experiences for the young kids just like I had. In all of the time that I spent there, I only had one majorly bad experience, and to be honest, I forgot about it very quickly until recently. I'll get to the experience in a second, but I have to preface this with something that I learned while I was much older and volunteering there. Because when the incident happened, all of the kids, including myself, were just left in the dark about what happened to Craig. Craig was our camp counselor, but after the incident, we all just went back to having fun. Nobody briefed us about what happened to Craig. So this is the day of the incident. We were supposed to be taking out tubing, but our counselor Craig told us day of that tubing was canceled. But he assured us that he had something more fun planned that evening, and his only direction was for all of us to just do whatever we wanted, play, but meet him at the camp counselor's cabin at sunset. He told us this while he was still standing right in front of the camp counselor's cabin, and right after he finished talking, he stepped back and closed the door and locked himself in. And the man didn't come out for the rest of the day. He just left all of us, my entire group of campers, to do whatever we wanted all day. We all just played games unattended while all the other groups were out on different excursions. We were completely unsupervised, but we thought that was fun. We had no rules. We were all friends and we just wanted to play sports. We weren't trying to get in trouble, so that's what we did. We weren't exactly a mischievous bunch, and we didn't want to risk getting in trouble here because we liked it so much, and we didn't want to mess it up. We felt like it was a privilege for all of us to come here and have these summers together. But even though we were perfectly behaved, all of the other camp counselors were very confused when they came back and saw all of us unattended. So they immediately went to the cabin to go confront Craig. But Craig would not open up, and he wouldn't even answer them. All of us, my entire group, thought it was all part of Craig's plan. We thought he was building something up fun for us later that night, so we didn't think anything of it. We loved Craig. He was the best counselor, and we trusted that man fully. The other counselors sent us back to our cabins while they were fixing the issue, but they sent us way before sunset. We didn't realize that Craig was actually in trouble or this was a big issue, so we were sent back way before sunset, so by the time sunset was coming around, we figured we were still supposed to meet Craig at that cabin. We didn't think we were doing anything wrong. We were just doing what we were told by a person we trusted. We listened to the other camp counselors to go back to our cabin, but then we were also told to head back and meet him at sunset at his cabin. So we thought we were doing everything right. So 5 of us walked back to his cabin. We didn't know what we were going to walk into, but there were no other camp counselors in front of it. We figured that either the issue was resolved or they went and hung out somewhere else. And when we walked up to his cabin, he quickly opened it and he told us all to come in right when we walked up. So all 5 of us just walked through the door, doing what we were told because we trust Craig. Again, we thought he had something super fun planned like he always does. It felt very similar to last summer when he had spooky campfire stories prepared for us with props with it. Nothing about
He about to bring out that Ouija board on y'all.
The situation felt uncomfortable. Like I said, we trusted Craig, but I personally don't think Craig was there with us that night based on what I learned years later. So all 5 of us walk into that cabin, find seats, some on bunk beds, some on the floor, and Craig just goes into the middle of the circle and lifts up a floorboard. And under that floorboard, Craig pulled out this round box calendar looking thing. It was wooden with metal engravings with a weird circular calendar on the front. The box was a little bit weird, but we were all pretty excited, even though Craig was acting a little bit bizarre that evening. But we all thought it was part of the bit. We thought this was going to be a fun thing that he had prepared for us. So we sat tight and we waited for it to become fun. And once he had it out and he showed it to all of us, he told us all that we had to unlock this box and ask it a very serious question. He said, make sure it's something that you really, really want to know. I could still see his facial expression in my head. He was so excited for us to do this. I even remember seeing him drool a little bit after handing the box to Timmy. I literally watched drool fall from his mouth and drip to his chin before he wiped it and started giggling. Then he ordered each kid to go one by one opening the box. And the first kid that he handed it to, Timmy, asked him what date he should put in to try to open the box. And Craig answered his question like a coked out preschool teacher trying to lead a toddler to an answer. He said, not the day you die, but inferring the day you were born. And everybody proceeded to ask it one question. I don't even remember the question that I asked it, but I remember Timmy's question because he was the first one, and Craig's response to it was a little bit weird. Timmy asked it, am I going to be rich? I couldn't see inside of the box after he asked the question, but his facial expression told me that something moved inside of it. And it must have been the little heart-shaped piece. But Timmy didn't look upset at the time. Timmy looked pretty happy about it. But I didn't know why he seemed happy until the box finally got to me and I was able to see inside of it and it had a yes and no option. So it must have said yes to Timmy when Timmy asked if he was going to be rich. And mind you, at the time, I hadn't seen The Exorcist movie or any other scary movie for that matter. I was a bit sheltered as a kid. At the time, I didn't know the inside was a Ouija board or a makeshift Ouija board, but now I know it was. When it was my turn, I don't remember the question I asked it, but I know the heart-shaped piece didn't move, so I just closed it and passed it to the next kid. But after everybody was finished asking it questions and closed it, Craig acted more bizarre and he started saying like really inappropriate things, like really gross things specifically to Timmy. And Craig was cool. He would joke around, he made us feel like he was one of the guys, he would even throw a gross joke here and there. But what he was saying on this night to Timmy was completely out of pocket and made everybody uncomfortable. Nobody had seen Craig act like that before or heard him talk like that before. And during Craig's odd verbal onslaught directed at Timmy, the door was actually kicked in by police. They arrested Craig on the spot. No questions asked, they just grabbed him and I never saw Craig again. Nobody gave us a real explanation about what happened. They just slightly questioned us, making sure that he didn't touch any of us, and that was it. And then the rest of camp, the rest of the summer was absolutely fantastic, as it usually is. So we never thought about it again. I only found out more about it when I became a volunteer. It came up randomly at a lunch table about a counselor that went absolutely crazy a few years earlier. The senior counselor that was telling the story said that he was working during it. So naturally, once I get a little bit more context and I hear Craig's name, I let everybody at the table know that I was actually there that night because I was one of the kids. And everybody at the table looked at me a little bit funny, and he made sure that it wasn't a sore subject for me before he filled me in on everything that he knew about it. And it wasn't a sore subject for me at all. He was weird for like 10 minutes and he was arrested, then I didn't think about him again. I played kickball. And I told everybody exactly what happened at the table from inside of the cabin. And the dude that was telling the story, acting as if he knew all the details, had never heard those details before about the box and what actually happened inside of the cabin. Apparently nobody knew about that part and he thought that that was super weird. But this guy went on to tell the table and myself what went on beforehand that led to them calling the police. Apparently Craig had been acting bizarre all week. He wasn't taking care of any of his duties, he was acting really weird, and he was trying to isolate people in a really creepy way. He stopped replying to his name and he just seemed to be completely in his own world. And they had actually asked him to relieve himself of all of his duties the night before we were supposed to go tubing, but when they said that, he immediately changed his tune. He acted as if he was just joking the whole time and playing a joke on his friends, his camp counselor friends, and he would be completely okay the next day. And it kind of made sense to the other counselors because tubing was Craig's favorite thing to do, and he wasn't shy to do a practical joke here and there. But when the counselors came back after he was supposed to take us tubing, the counselors knew that he was lying the night before. That was the last straw and he had to go. And they had tried to get into the cabin that he had locked himself in, but after about 40 minutes of attempting to breach the windows and the door, and he wasn't allowing them in through any access point, they gave up. They went back to the other cabin and they called the police. Then they had to go wait for the police in the front of camp before walking them back. And in that intermediate time, we had come back and he had about 10 minutes alone isolating us. But apparently, after the police had detained him, he went absolutely berserk and was screaming obscenities. He was saying absolute fabricated lies about all the things that he did to all the little boys in his camp. He was saying horrible, grotesque things that would send you to prison. Everybody at the table seemed pretty happy that this didn't actually happen because nobody was really sure, because he was openly admitting to these very specific grotesque actions committed on children. And nobody understands why anybody would self-admit to something that they didn't do, especially that. Everybody was looking at me a little bit funny when those details were added, but I assured everybody, he didn't do any of that. Craig was the absolute best. I'm not forgetting traumatic things that happened to me. He really didn't do anything. So it made no sense why he would admit to doing stuff that he didn't do. And I never found out what happened to Craig after that. But I just heard news about Timmy. Apparently, Timmy went on to become a gym teacher. He was a great part of the community. He was a father. He was just an overall good neighborhood guy. He had everything that a man could ask for. A good job, a loving wife, healthy kids, a beautiful house, and not to mention summers off. But one thing Timmy didn't do was chase wealth. When he asked that box if he would be rich that night, it said yes. But he never did anything to pursue wealth. He just found wealth in things that really mattered. I would go check his Facebook from time to time. He looked extremely happy and fulfilled. But I just found out that he had a horrible accident last year. A tire fell off of a car that was going 60 miles an hour, and this stray tire came barreling down the street. He was just walking down the street going to get a coffee in the morning when this tire collided with the back of his head and the back of his neck, leaving him completely paralyzed from the neck down. Obviously, his entire family was mourning and freaking out, not knowing if he was going to be okay, but the attorneys were fighting for him the entire time he was recovering, and they actually managed to get him $100 million settlement from the company that manufactured the car that had the wheel fall off. I went to go visit Timmy after I'd heard about it, just to check in on him, just to let him know that I was thinking about him, making sure that he was okay. And you know what he said to me? This man told me that when his wife held up the $100 million check to him, he didn't look at the dollar amount. He looked at the date on the check, and he said that it was the same date that the box shuffled to, the day that he unlocked it. And he said that the box was right. He was going to be rich one day. But immediately he said, I was rich before that check, and I would pay $100 million to have my old life back.
Dang.
So this story was a public case, and I'm not going to use any real names.
No, hold on. Wait a minute. That's crazy. Yeah, I would definitely prefer. Damn, he got his wealth, $100 million from a settlement. I would rather have my life than to be wheelchair bound with $100 million in the bank. That's crazy. It's a good story.
Out of respect for the... So this story was a public case, and I'm not going to use any real names out of respect for the victims. I also want you to consider that the story behind this case is also considered a conspiracy theory. But it seems like these days, every conspiracy theory is coming true, so I might as well tell it anyway. Besides, with the evidence of the two previous stories, I feel like this story holds a little bit more weight. So when I started digging into this concept about this Dybbuk box, this story came up about a serial murderer, and this man was blaming all of his murders on a demon that was framing him. He went on to say that this demon came from a box and possessed his best friend. And apparently this man had killed 8 people in the span of 8 hours in the 1960s. And after this 8-hour spree of killing, he was finally caught over the last victim's body at the crime scene, and he was arrested on the spot. He had wreaked havoc on a small town overnight, and the story became national news. And everyone in the country at the time knew his name and was celebrating his arrest. When a raging murderer gets caught at a crime scene, everybody's natural reaction is to celebrate. No one wants to hear his side of the story. Anybody that is caught red-handed doing the types of things that he was doing, nobody has any sympathy for them. Everyone just hates him and prays for his victims' families. The issue with this story is that he maintained his stance that he was completely innocent, even being caught at the scene. And for years, he was torn apart by the media. They treated this man like the devil himself, hit piece after hit piece. There was even crowds of people standing outside of his trial, chanting for him to get the death penalty. He must have been the most hated man in the country for a decade, but he never admitted it. He always said that it was somebody else that did it. Even after being sentenced to life in prison, he promised that he did not do it. He even tried to publish a book with his side of the story, but nobody would put it out for him. He was hated for what he did to all of those people, and nobody wanted to support getting this murderer's word out. But he left behind handwritten notes that he wrote from his cell, and the story that he told was absolutely bizarre. Apparently, him and his best friend used to dive down in the lake to scavenge for valuables. They would constantly find change, rings, necklaces, earrings, and plenty of other valuables to sell. It was a profitable hobby. And one random day, his friend came to the surface holding up this very interesting looking box. And upon inspecting it, his friend decided that he wanted to keep it. And apparently, his best friend had become obsessed with this box and stopped hanging out with him for a few weeks. He didn't know if his friend was mad at him or something, but he just didn't hear from him. Until one night, his best friend showed up unannounced to his apartment with the box in hand. He wrote that his friend was bragging about figuring it out, and that with this box he could predict the future. He said the box was telling him things that hadn't happened yet. He said the box was giving him winning lottery numbers and scores to baseball games that hadn't occurred yet. He said that he had already won thousands of dollars off the numbers. And anybody would be curious to see if this box actually worked, if it could predict baseball games so you could become a sports betting millionaire. Not to mention winning the lottery. Winning the lottery sounded fun to this guy, so he asked his best friend how the box worked. But when he asked his friend to show him how it works, he said, you open it. It only works if you open it yourself. Just put in your born date. The process seemed simple enough, so he turned these circular dials to his date of birth, and the box just made some weird sounds and popped right open. But before it popped open, the dates reset to December 4th, 2004. Mind you, he referred to that date in his writings for years. And once it was open, his best friend told him to warm it up with a couple silly questions. So the man playfully asked the box, "Will I be famous one day?" Nothing crazy happened with the box. It didn't do anything. It didn't react to his question. But his best friend started acting very weird. And his best friend replied to him, "Famous? You want to be famous? Oh yeah, I'll make you famous. What do you want to be famous for? Art? Singing? Do you want to be an Olympic athlete? No, you're too old for that. Maybe modeling? No, you're too ugly for that. How about murder? Yeah, that's good. Murder. Isn't that right, murder boy? Let's get you famous. Let's make you famous, murder boy." And his best friend turned around and walked right out the front door, down the stairs, and across the street. He didn't know what his best friend was doing. He didn't know why his best friend would lash out at him like that. So he just followed him. And his friend went across the street and right up to the neighbor's door and rang their doorbell. One of his very friendly neighbors opened the door, and right when she opened it, he forced his way in and started attacking this woman. And by the time the man got into the house to stop his best friend from attacking this woman, he had already killed her. And he was just standing over her smiling, waiting for him to come in and see him. The man was staring at his psychotic best friend in disbelief, and his best friend looked at him menacingly and said, "You're gonna be famous," before sprinting out the back door, still wielding a blood-soaked knife. The man instinctively followed his best friend, trying to stop him from doing this again. And he's screaming and yelling for help for somebody else to call the police, but nobody did. They were in the inner city, so everybody is used to hearing crazy people screaming, and nobody...
Hold on. That's crazy. All right. So I think the freaking box used his best friend instead of like just responding with an answer. The box used his best friend to make him famous by committing this heinous act and probably blackmailing him or framing him for it. This is crazy.
did. They were in the inner city, so everybody is used to hearing crazy people screaming, and nobody calls the police. They just mind their own business. He said it seemed as if his friend was in some type of trance, and his friend was just focused on the famous thing. And he was always one step ahead. He just kept going after people, and he ended up killing 8 people that night. And the last person he killed was right by the lake, right where they found the box at. The man maintained until the day that he died that his best friend killed all those people, that he didn't do it. And he says that his best friend jumped into the lake while he was trying to save the last person from bleeding out, and he never saw his friend again. He maintains that he was trying to save the people. The only issue is that the knife and the best friend were never found, so the police just figured that he had also killed his best friend. Him and his friend kind of looked alike. He fit the description of the man running away from every single crime scene. The cops just assumed that he was insane, he killed all these people, he killed his friend, and they found him at the last body. So this man spent his entire life in prison, and here's the kicker. He was proven to be innocent via DNA evidence December 4th, 2004, which was the date that the box showed him after it unlocked. He was famous his entire life for being a murderer, and now he's famous for being wrongly convicted, but famous nonetheless.
That's crazy. That's wild. Oh my God. Woo! I heard a story recently, a Ouija board story from this woman on TikTok, and I'm gonna have to share it with you all. We're gonna watch her story. It's supposed to be a real story too, and I don't want to spoil nothing, so we just gonna hold off until we do that story. But anyway, leave your thoughts, comments, and opinions down below, and I'm gonna catch y'all in the next one. Shout out to Dougie. Link to his video down below. See you.